My name is Charlotte Hayes, 34 years old, born into what looked like a perfect family in the suburbs of Connecticut. From the outside, people thought I was lucky. Wealthy parents, a younger sister adored as a rising star in media. But behind the doors of that big house, I was nothing more than the one who set the table, washed the dishes, cooked the meals, and stayed silent. For nearly 2 decades, every holiday of mine was spent in the kitchen, while Emily, my younger sister, was treasured like a jewel. My parents proudly boasted about her to friends, while they introduced me as the daughter between jobs. And then, on that Christmas Eve, inside the lavish mansion, where my mother hosted a grand party for 40 VIP guests to elevate Emily in front of a billionaire investor, suddenly every gaze turned to me, not because of the food I cooked, but because that very billionaire Richard Coleman stood up, pointed at me, and said, "She's the one I came here to meet. This is the boss, the woman leading the strategic project my company has been waiting to sign." The entire room fell silent. I was seen for who I truly was. Have you ever been belittled by your own family to the point where they couldn't even recognize who you really are? Leave me a comment. I read every single one. And if this story resonates with you, hit like and subscribe to this channel so you can follow my journey of turning the tables. Because right after this, I'll tell you what really happened before that fateful Christmas Eve. I still remember my 16th birthday vividly, not because there was cake or warm wishes meant for me, but because that day, my mother, Margaret Hayes, handed me a long list of dishes to prepare for nearly 40 guests, most of them Emily's friends. She was only 12, yet my mother had ordered her a custom pearl-colored silk dress, a salon appointment, and even hired a photographer to capture her every smile. And me? I wore an old sweater with worn-out shoulders, standing at the sink from morning until night. My mother passed by, glanced at me polishing the silver tray without blinking, and said in her detached voice, "Charlotte, make sure that tray shines. Don't embarrass me in front of the guests." I nodded without a word. My father, Robert Hayes, walked into the kitchen just then, looked at me for a brief second, and then turned away, as if I were a piece of furniture not worth his attention. That was the first time I asked myself, was I really living in my own home? Years went by, and I remained the one behind the dazzling Hayes family parties. Christmas, Thanksgiving, the 4th of July, I had no holidays. While Emily emerged from her bedroom like she was stepping onto a stage, hair perfectly curled, nails freshly manicured, voice sweet as honey, I was drenched in sweat in the kitchen, checking the turkey's temperature, peeling vegetables, and polishing every last glass. The older we grew, the clearer the distance became, not just in clothing or demeanor, but in how others looked at us. "Emily is the pride of the family," my mother often said in front of her friends. "She works in PR for some of the biggest brands, and Charlotte, she helps me with the parties at home." No one asked what I did, what I studied, whether I had dreams. To them, I wasn't worth asking about. I didn't protest. I had learned that in my family, resistance was pointless. Every reaction from me would be labeled too sensitive, causing trouble, or worse, jealous of her sister. There was a time I suggested enrolling in an event design course in New York. My mother looked at me as if I had said something foolish. "That's not for you, Charlotte. You're not good at socializing, and you don't have the taste Emily does. Helping me at home suits you best." When Emily went off to college, she was sent away with an outdoor party featuring fireworks and a live band. When I landed an internship at a small event planning firm, no one at home mentioned it. My mother even warned me not to delude myself into thinking I could do something significant. I quietly left on a night bus, clutching a cheap suitcase and a little notebook where I had written down every idea about events, parties, decor, and details I had observed at the gatherings in our home. I started at the very bottom, cleaning up trash, moving tables, carrying fresh flowers from the market. I worked tirelessly, never complained, learned everything through observation and notes. No one knew. No one asked. Every year I sent Christmas cards home, but the only replies were glossy pictures of Emily beside a tall tree, my mother in her velvet dress, my father raising a champagne glass. I wasn't in the pictures, my name wasn't even in the greetings, in their eyes I was a shadow, so I stopped. I stopped waiting for recognition. Instead of knocking on a door that would never open, I built my own. I founded my first company with just enough capital to rent a tiny office and hire a part-time assistant. I named it Lumina Strategies. I chose Lumina because it meant light, the very thing I had always lacked in my own family. At first, I took small contracts, anniversaries, client conferences for local businesses, but I treated each event like it was my one chance to prove myself. Every detail was checked carefully, from the color of the tablecloths to the type of flowers on each centerpiece. Soon, old clients referred new ones. 1 year passed, then 2. I hired more staff, opened another branch in Los Angeles. I learned to manage, negotiate, and lead like someone who was born for it. No one in my family knew. They still texted to ask if I could come help cook during the holidays, clean out the garage, or pick up Emily's wedding cake. I replied politely but always declined. They never suspected, because in their minds, Charlotte was still the useless older sister, good for nothing but washing dishes. Until that Christmas Eve. The night when every insult, every pitying look, every mocking laugh was silenced as Richard Coleman, the billionaire my mother dreamed of charming, stood up in the middle of the banquet, looked at me with respect, and said, "Charlotte is the one leading the biggest project of this quarter. She's the CEO of Lumina. She's the one behind the entire success of our brand restructuring campaign. And I am grateful to have her on my team." No one spoke. My mother froze in her seat. Emily stared at me as if she had never seen me before. My father blinked repeatedly, trying to grasp what was happening. And me? I simply smiled, nodded slightly, and turned to Richard. "Thank you. I value this partnership too." I didn't need them to understand what it took for me to get there. I just needed them to know that from that moment on, I was no longer a shadow in their house. On the outside, Emily was the image many envied. Beautiful face, softly curled blonde hair always in place, a voice sweet enough to seem trained never to offend. She lived in an Upper East Side luxury condo my parents bought for her, Italian furniture, white marble, a private dressing room with light-edged mirrors, and a leased car co-signed by my mother. She works PR for famous brands, my mother would boast at every gathering. In reality, most of Emily's contracts came through family connections or favors my mother called in. I never felt jealousy, only a quiet heaviness, watching her walk through doors wide open while I carved my path barehanded. Unlike Emily, I lived in Soho, in a 2-bedroom apartment under my own name. No one paid the down payment for me. No one co-signed. I bought it with the money I saved from the first 3 years running Lumina Strategies, the company I started when no one even knew my name. My first office was just a shared space in a converted factory building in Long Island City. I created my own slides, met every client myself, and spent nights crunching budget numbers and drafting thank you emails. My work wasn't glamorous like Emily's Instagram posts. I didn't sip cocktails at pool parties, didn't check in at Paris Fashion Week. I worked behind the scenes. I was the one answering phone calls at 3 a.m. when a brand faced a PR crisis. The one standing in the dark wings of a stage, checking wires and lights before a CEO went out to speak. We didn't advertise our names. Lumina's success lay in everything running so smoothly no one noticed who was behind it. In professional circles, I earned an unofficial title, the fixer, the one who repaired what no one wanted exposed, the one who helped Fortune 500 companies preserve their reputations, rescue brands from collapse by repositioning them, designing communication strategies, and most of all, staying silent at the right time. Once, I took on a contract to handle the aftermath for a major airline after an internal data leak. 3 weeks without going home, eating and sleeping in the office alongside legal, tech, and communications teams. We stopped the boycott wave with just 2 short videos, 3 press conferences, and a trust rebuilding plan timed to the hour. No one mentioned my name in their public thanks. I didn't need them to. All I needed was that short email from the CEO. Without you and Lumina, we would have lost everything. Unlike Emily, I didn't live for recognition. I lived for results. People like Emily could make noise on social media, but my voice was in executive emails, in strategy binders locked in safes, and in handshakes with no photos attached. One rule I set when running Lumina: never use the name Hayes in any file. I wanted everything I earned to carry no trace of the family that had always belittled me. That's why many partners had no idea I was Margaret Hayes's daughter, the woman who loved calling herself the society hostess of Connecticut. She often organized themed brunches, hired professional florists, rented catering staff, but still made me wash dishes afterward. When I wasn't there, she told guests, "Charlotte isn't outgoing, she prefers kitchen work. But Emily, she's worked with celebrities. Do you know singer Ava Clark?" Emily's company once handled her tour PR. It sounded glamorous, but in truth, Emily only worked briefly in the communications department 1 quarter before being let go for missing deadlines and poor professionalism. That part, of course, was never mentioned. I never intended to compare. But sometimes, in the quiet nights with financial reports spread out before me, I wondered, why was being quieter, less showy, preferring the shadows enough to erase me from existence? I once tried to tell my mother about one of my first big contracts. Lumina had been chosen as the strategist for a pharmaceutical company facing a media storm over alleged side effects of a new drug. "You handle communications?" she asked, her tone flat. "Sounds like the kind of work Emily does, but probably on a lower level, right?" I looked down at my tea. I had built a plan that kept them from class action lawsuits, redirected coverage to independent studies, and connected them with neutral experts. That single project preserved nearly $1 billion in stock value in less than 3 weeks. My mother didn't care. To her, what mattered was that I was still unmarried, had no travel photos, no designer handbags. In her eyes, that meant I wasn't really living. Once, I even tried bringing Emily to an event Lumina organized, pretending she was a guest with the CEO to see if she would notice. She only smiled, scrolled her phone, made small talk, and then said, "Feels kind of intense. You do things like this all the time? I thought you just handled weddings or charity galas." I looked at Emily then and realized there are people who not only fail to see when they're wrong, but who are incapable of imagining anyone else's life if it doesn't mirror the world they know. So I chose silence. I let Emily and my mother live in their world, believing I still worked odd jobs, still between gigs, still the one they could call at any moment to haul boxes or cook stew for a weekend party. I let them believe it not because I lacked the courage to confront them, but because I was waiting for the right moment when they would realize on their own they never knew me at all. And when that moment came, it wouldn't just be a shock. It would be a lesson. Not for revenge, for closure. On the morning of December 23rd, my phone rang just as I stepped out of my final meeting of the week. It had been an internal briefing with the legal team of a client in New Jersey, a hospital chain rebuilding its reputation after a series of investigative articles in the local press. The meeting had lasted over 4 hours, tense, confidential, and requiring every ounce of focus. As I removed my Bluetooth earpiece, I saw the screen flash. "Mom." My thumb hovered over the decline button, but I stopped. I took a deep breath and answered. Charlotte. My mother's voice, Margaret Hayes, never bothered with greetings. The same commanding tone, as if every word she spoke was an order not up for debate. Emily is hosting Christmas at the house. 40 guests. Very important people. You need to be here by noon on the 24th to prepare the main course and handle the entire table decor. I froze mid-step, looking out through the glass lobby doors. The building's Christmas tree, nearly 10 feet tall, was already fully decorated, its golden lights twinkling against the double-paned glass. I didn't answer right away. My mother continued as though my agreement was irrelevant. There will be several communications executives, 2 major investors, and most importantly, Richard Coleman will be there. You know the name, don't you? Coleman Capital. Emily has invited him. This is a huge opportunity. I tightened my grip on my bag, my voice even. You're calling just to order me to cook? What else do you have to do? She chuckled softly, but the ridicule laced every note. You're always good in the kitchen. And at the very least, you should support your family when it counts. Mom, I'm not available. Don't be selfish, Charlotte. Her tone dropped, shifting into that familiar threat. Emily is working for the future of this family, and you should be grateful you can at least help. I glanced down at the open planner in my hand. On the 24th, I was flying to Miami. On the 25th, I would be sitting down with Coleman's team to finalize a $5 million contracted deal that could position Lumina for national-level strategy consulting. Calmly, I said, I already have plans. Important work. On the other end, my mother gave a derisive laugh. What work? Baking cookies for a coffee shop? Charlotte, stop dreaming and help your family. Don't make me disappointed. I stayed silent. I'd heard that phrase too many times before. Her voice sharpened. If you refuse, don't expect me to call you home again. This family doesn't need traitors. I didn't respond. Inside, there was still a dull ache. Not because her threats held any power over me, but because they dragged me back to all those past holidays, when I did everything in silence only to be forgotten in the family photos. I ended the call without another word. Back at the office, I walked into my private meeting room, opened my laptop, and pulled up the Coleman Capital Agreement. There on the screen was my name, Charlotte Hayes, CEO, legal representative, deal lead. The irony. The man Emily was desperate to impress at tomorrow's party was the very man I was about to sign with. I opened my inbox. A fresh email from Coleman's vice. President confirmed Richard Coleman's attendance at our December 25th meeting, expressing how much they looked forward to working with me after months of negotiations. I leaned back in my chair. There was something almost comedic about it all. My mother and Emily pouring every ounce of energy into projecting success to a man I'd been collaborating with for half a year. And all the while, they still thought I was the unemployed daughter scraping by on college savings. That evening, a text from Emily arrived. Mom said you'll be cooking for the party. Don't mess it up like Thanksgiving. Richard Coleman will be there. I want to impress him. I didn't reply. Instead, I sent a message to my assistant. Confirm flight for the 24th. Earliest to Miami. Her response came within a minute. Business class ticket. Departure 6:15 a.m. I nodded to myself. I knew I was standing at a threshold. On one side, the long shadow of contempt. On the other, the affirmation I had built with every ounce of adulthood. And never had I been more ready to cross it completely, without looking back. When I lay down on the night of December 23rd, my mind wouldn't stop spinning. I should have been thinking about the meeting with Richard Coleman, the numbers, the strategies, the presentation I had prepared with precision. But instead, my thoughts dragged me backward, to years I had tried to bury. Memories still sat there, in the dusty drawer of my mind, waiting for the slightest tug to burst open. Christmas, when I was 17, my mother hosted a cocktail party for my father's partners. I wore a plain gray knit dress, bought off the clearance rack. Emily, only 13 then, had been taken to get her hair styled, fitted into a custom sky blue satin dress with matching flats and silver shimmer on her nails. My mother called it teaching her taste early. Around 8 p.m., while guests sipped wine and smoked salmon in the parlor, I was on my knees in the kitchen, scrubbing grease from the fryer. My mother stood near the doorway, whispering to a friend outside. Charlotte isn't good with words, but at least she's diligent. She cooks decently, fits the role of support. I heard every syllable. Role of support. A moment later, she pushed through the door, shoved a rag into my hands, and whispered, "There's a red wine spill near the sofa. Go clean it. Don't let anyone notice." I stood up, flour dust on my sweater, hair a mess, my hands reeking of raw onions. As I stepped into the living room, some guests noticed me. One woman turned to ask my mother, "Is that your daughter?" My mother smiled faintly. "Oh yes, Charlotte. She prefers the kitchen." I don't remember exactly what I felt, only that I lowered my head, walked quickly to the stain, and scrubbed it as if erasing myself. Months later, Emily turned 14 and received a pastel pink Mini Cooper. The keys sat in a luxury gift box tied with a silver ribbon. Me? When I got my acceptance letter for a summer scholarship at an event design program in Chicago, my mother only said, "That's too far. What will you even do after? Stay there as a low-paid assistant?" I folded the letter, shoved it into a drawer, and never spoke of it again. My childhood room had once been painted soft blue, with a particle board desk my father assembled, and shelves lined with classic novels. After I moved out at 25, my mother had the walls repainted, the desk removed, and replaced with 3 rows of shelves to hold Emily's heels and designer handbags. "Your sister needs space," she said, as if it were obvious. "Your room sitting empty is a waste." I didn't argue. But months later, when I returned to collect a few old things, I discovered my high school medals, letters I had written to her, and the music box my father had given me at age 10, all shoved into a dusty box in the basement. I sat on the cold cement floor, opened the lid, and the broken melody still played. Footsteps approached. It was my father. He stood on the basement stairs, hands in his pockets, eyes avoiding mine. He didn't say a word, just stared for a moment before turning away. The door shut quietly. Robert Hayes was a man of silence. Whether I was scolded, ordered around, or humiliated, he never spoke up. Never stopped my mother, never asked if I was okay. "You know your mom is tough," he once whispered when I was 15. "But she cares about the family. Try to understand." I had understood for 20 years. The more I understood, the more I disappeared from that family portrait. Weeks before this Christmas party, I received a card from my mother. Not to check on me. It was a printed invitation. "The Hayes family warmly invites you to our Christmas Eve gala celebrating our pride, Emily Hayes." The word Emily embossed in gold foil. My name nowhere. I nearly tossed it in the trash, but instead I tucked it into the Coleman Capital Project folder. Part as a reminder, part as a marker of the end. I no longer wished for an apology from my mother. I didn't hope Emily would one day see her own shallowness. I didn't expect my father to finally defend me after years of silence. I needed nothing from them. Only one thing, that the truth would be revealed not with anger, but through the very success they had blinded themselves to. And this Christmas, they would be the ones forced to face what they never wanted to see. I woke at 5 a.m. on December 24, the soft light of the city slipping through my window. No alarm, no voice outside my door like when I was little, my mother commanding, "Charlotte, get up early, chop the vegetables, wipe the tables." I sat up, pulled on a wool robe, poured a glass of water, and gazed out at the city still hushed. Early morning in New York, at the end of December, had its own stillness. Not loud like the day, not glittering like the night, just the freezing air and pale streetlights threading through glass towers. I turned to the suitcase nearly packed from the night before. Still some space left. I added a light gray suit and matte leather heels. That was the outfit I'd wear when signing with Richard Coleman, not to impress. But to walk into that room as myself, nothing more, nothing less, no one's permission required. When the clock struck 6, I snapped a photo of the paper I had left on the kitchen counter. A short list, 3 catering companies offering 24-hour service, phone numbers included, and a note in neat handwriting. If needed, call. They handle luxury events. Beside it lay my new business card. Fresh from the press, gold embossed on ivory stock. Charlotte Hayes, CEO, Lumina Strategies, no address. Just my work number and executive email. On the fridge door, I stuck a small note. I'm away on business, wishing you a peaceful Christmas. That was all I left behind. At 6:07 a.m., as I sat in an Uber heading for JFK, my phone rang again. It was my mother. I placed it face down on the seat beside me. A minute later, Emily. A text lit up the screen. Where are you? Mom says you left? I didn't reply. The driver asked if I wanted music. I shook my head, told him to leave it quiet. The car glided through streets, still asleep, across the Williamsburg Bridge and onto the highway. I switched my phone to silent mode. My mother called 3 more times. Emily sent a long message, ending with, Richard Coleman will be there. This is a huge opportunity. You can't be this selfish. I stared at the words, remembering how many times they had used that phrase to force my sacrifice. Every holiday I scrubbed kitchens from dawn. Every vacation I gave up because Emily needed support. Every contract I once turned down because the family needs their daughter at home. And all of it wrapped in the same excuse, think of others. The flight departed on time. I carried nothing but 2 business outfits, my laptop, printed files, and a small wallet with exactly 3 photos. One of me with the Lumina team at our Los Angeles branch opening. One of Maria, my head chef, smiling wide at the year-end party, and one of a corner of the desk where I drafted my very first contract. I didn't bring a family photo because I was too used to never being in the frame. The flight to Miami lasted nearly 3 hours, calm and quiet as if the universe knew I needed peace to prepare. When we landed, my phone showed 14 missed calls and 11 unread messages, most of them from Emily. The latest sent at 10:32 a.m. Mom is losing it. What do you think you're doing? The whole house is in chaos. Everyone's waiting for food. There's the creative director of Vogue, a representative from Bordeaux Wines, and Richard Coleman. Do you even know? I knew every name on that guest list. Because more than half of them had already crossed my path, clients, partners, or prospects. One had hired me as an exclusive consultant for 3 months. Another I had steered through a data breach crisis. And Richard Coleman, the very man I was about to sign a contract with to overhaul his corporation's entire brand strategy. They didn't know who I was under the label Charlotte Margaret Hayes' daughter. They only knew me as the woman who could restore a brand's image in under 2 weeks. The one coordinating national crisis communication teams. The one behind events praised by the press as sophisticated, intelligent, and unmatched in market insight. I had nothing left to prove. The truth was surfacing on its own. At the hotel, the concierge escorted me to the suite Coleman Capital had reserved. Top floor, ocean view, walnut and marble interiors. On the table sat a chilled bottle of champagne and a handwritten note. Charlotte, looking forward to meeting you in person tomorrow. Our team has been waiting a long time. Wishing you a peaceful Christmas Eve. Richard Coleman. I set the card down, exhaling slowly. Beyond the window, the sun blazed over the sea. No mother shouting. No scolding, no lingering smell of cooking oil, just waves and the steady rhythm of my heartbeat. I had stepped out of the house where I was nothing but a shadow, and I had no intention of returning. That evening, December 24th, as I sat rereading the agreement at the desk in my suite, my phone buzzed nonstop. I hadn't planned to check it, but something urged me to unlock the screen. 18 missed calls, 32 texts. The last one from Emily, "What are you doing? Mom's about to faint. The guests are seated. There's nothing in the kitchen." I didn't answer. I set the phone down, folded the contract, and pulled back the curtains to the dark sea outside. The water rippled faintly, distant lights glittering in streaks across its surface. I could imagine the scene inside the Connecticut mansion, the clatter of dishes, rushed footsteps, my mother's voice rising in desperation, and Emily, in her custom red silk gown, screaming into her phone while reapplying smeared lipstick. Another message, this one from my father. "Charlotte, your mother is very stressed. Can you help calm things down?" I sat down, poured a glass of water, left the champagne untouched. The silence was almost eerie. I opened my laptop and logged into Lumina's event control feed for a client in Chicago, just to make sure everything ran smoothly. My staff, from Maria to the tech crew, checked in with regular updates. No one mentioned Christmas. No one asked why I wasn't home. They simply reported with absolute trust. Meanwhile, at the house where I was born, where I was erased into a shadow, everything was unraveling. 10 minutes later, a voice memo arrived from an old high school friend, by chance a guest at the party. I hit play. "I'm so sorry, everyone." My mother's voice strained. "Just a minor issue in the kitchen. We'll serve shortly. Some appetizers will be right out." Another woman cut in. "Margaret, I thought you had a private chef?" Emily's nervous laugh slipped through. "Yes, well, my sister usually helps for the holidays. But she had something come up." A man interrupted. "I heard your sister doesn't even work in hospitality." Emily stammered. "Uh, not really. She's unemployed, between jobs." The silence after that hung heavy, suffocating. I closed the file. The phone buzzed again. A text from an unsaved number, Charlotte. "This is Jeanette. We worked together at the Spectra Hotel's launch. Is your sister Emily Hayes? I was just at a party she hosted, and honestly, it was chaos. Your mother blamed someone named Charlotte who walked out." I thought I recognized the name. I replied, "Yes, that's me. I'm sorry you had to witness that." Jeanette answered instantly, "Actually, I don't hold it against you. I just feel sorry. They have no idea who they're talking about." I set the phone down and looked out at the ocean again. For a moment, I could picture the long dining table back home, hand-embroidered French linens, silver-polished weekly, the chandelier glittering overhead, and in the middle of it all, Domino's pizza boxes and buckets of KFC chicken. I could almost hear my mother shriek, "Who brought this in here? This was supposed to impress investors." Emily, panicked, frantically ordering takeout on her phone while guests whispered to one another. One seated near the window asked quietly, "Is Richard Coleman coming? I heard he's considering investing in Emily's PR firm." Another chuckled, "He'll probably change his mind after seeing this circus." I imagined Richard Coleman's face as he arrived. The sharp gaze of a man who'd attended hundreds of galas, spent millions on press launches. And what did he find? A chaotic table, no. Host in control, no menu, no coordination. A hostess stammering excuses about her daughter who disappeared, named Charlotte. That name, on that night, suddenly became the center of the disaster even though I wasn't there. None of them knew that in less than 24 hours, Richard Coleman would be sitting across from me in a quiet conference room at the Marriott Grand Beach, shaking hands over a $5 million deal, calling me his strategic partner, and never mentioning the previous evening. No need to expose anyone. No need to shout to be seen. Lies collapse on their own when truth stands beside them. And that Christmas Eve, inside the Hayes mansion, everything crumbled, silently, without me. On the morning of December 25th, I arrived at the hotel lobby at 7 a.m., exactly as planned. No towering Christmas tree, no carolers, no raucous laughter like the ones I used to endure in Margaret Hayes's house. Here, the atmosphere belonged to another world, solemn, deliberate, and allergic to pretense. The concierge led me to a third-floor conference room where the Coleman Capital team awaited. I entered, composed. In my bag was the contract vetted line by line. In my mind were numbers, strategies, and the thought of facing a man my mother had used as a cover for last night's disaster. The door opened. 10 men and women sat around the glass table. Every head turned toward me. Richard Coleman lifted his gaze from the folder, squinted slightly, then chuckled. Not loud, just enough to show he recognized me. Charlotte Hayes, he said, standing, extending his hand. So you're the one I came here to meet. They call you a failure. I call you CEO. I shook his hand firmly, without hesitation. I'm glad to finally meet in person, I replied. I hope last night's dinner didn't sour your mood. He laughed louder. Oh no, I found it amusing, he said, glancing at his executives. In fact, everyone here should hear about it, but I'll let you tell it. I calmly took my seat at the head of the table beside him. My eyes met those of Laura Medina, the vice president of strategy, a composed woman who seemed to have caught whispers from the night before. I opened my laptop, projecting the presentation. Before clicking the first slide, I spoke slowly. I don't normally bring family matters into business. But apparently, last night's party raised questions about a certain Charlotte described in a very different context. Polite chuckles rippled around the room. Let me clarify. The woman Margaret Hayes mentioned last night, the one who didn't cook, who left, who supposedly embarrassed the family, is the same woman sitting here today, representing Lumina Strategies. Richard leaned back, arms folded, visibly entertained. I continued, I founded this company 6 years ago. We specialize in strategic communications, crisis management, and brand repositioning. We've successfully handled 2 major IPOs, 3 data breach crises, and numerous internal restructurings. All done quietly, as a rule. Laura leaned forward. You're really Margaret Hayes's daughter? Biologically, yes, I answered without flinching. Professionally, I've never tied this company to the Hayes name. Lumina was built independently, without family resources or connections. A beat of silence filled the room. She was behind Vega Pharmaceuticals' crisis recovery in 2020, Richard added, his tone proud as if he'd unearthed gold. We tracked that case. She was the invisible strategist. Another executive nodded, murmuring, I remember, the press called it an anonymous advisory team. I wrote that strategy, I confirmed. The room buzzed, not with doubt, but with astonishment and respect. Richard said slowly, last night I was introduced to you as Emily's unemployed sister, and I was served pizza on 18th century silverware. But honestly, I've never seen a clearer lesson in why you should never judge someone based on another's story. I only smiled. Laura turned to me. Do you ever feel conflicted working with clients your family is desperate to impress? No, I answered softly. I don't bring personal matters into work, but I don't use work to patch up family issues either. I do my part, and results are the only thing I let others judge. The meeting went smoothly. Every strategy slide was approved. The proposed value of collaboration was praised. Finally, Richard stood, pulled a fountain pen from his vest pocket. We're ready to sign. Do you have the contract? I slid the sealed folder across to him. When he finished signing, he didn't hand the pen back right away. He looked straight at me and spoke low, only for me to hear. They'll realize soon, and not because of your words, but because of your name on every front page. I nodded, tucked the contract into my leather case. I didn't need anyone to admit I was right. I only needed to do what had to be done. And that morning, what had to be done was to sit in a conference room, sign a strategic agreement that would put Lumina on the national map while back home. My mother was still calling my name in desperation, unable to understand how a useless daughter could vanish at the most important moment. As for me, I had stepped out of the shadow they built long ago and stood fully in my own light. I was sitting in my office on the 17th floor of the new headquarters, with full-length glass windows overlooking Central Park awash in golden autumn. The walnut desk felt smooth as velvet under my hand. Beside me lay a contract worth $12 million waiting for my signature. But I wasn't signing yet. I was reading the article. The special edition cover of Forbes showed me not in a gown, not standing beside anyone else, but in a photo of me in a dark blue suit, eyes looking directly into the lens, sharp and composed. The bold headline, Charlotte Hayes, from family servant to powerhouse CEO. No flowery words, no praise, just the truth. And the truth detonated the world. Once the article hit social media, it spread faster than any campaign Emily had ever managed. On one side was a photo of me shaking hands with the CEO of a tech giant at the signing of a $5 million deal. On the other side, an old shot the Hayes family in pajamas, eating pizza on the floor, while I stood in the corner holding a tray. Two worlds, one person. The comments poured in nonstop. Some applauded. She's the definition of resilience. Some mocked. Hayes? Does anyone even remember who they are? A few who once knew the family chimed in with stories about how I was treated, stories I thought I had buried. But now, everything resurfaced, as if justice itself had found its voice. I didn't speak publicly. I hadn't given an interview since leaving the Hayes mansion. But the press didn't need my words. They had data. They had images. They had changes so glaring no one could ignore. And Emily? She lost a major client just 3 days after the article ran. Celeste & Co. Cosmetics, whom I had once introduced to Emily, canceled their entire $2 million PR contract with a single phone call. Their representative said plainly, "We don't want our brand associated with someone who once bullied the current CEO of our strategic partner." Simple, clear, emotionless. Exactly the way Emily once told me she was cutting off my allowance when I still lived under their roof. I heard Margaret was asked to step down from the board of Women First, the charity she flaunted. The board had received a flood of emails about her classist remarks, along with an old recording I once saved, where she called domestic staff low-class people who don't deserve a seat at the table. Ironically, I didn't even have to release it. One of her former housekeepers posted it online in response to seeing the Forbes article about me, and Robert, an old colleague from Stanford, now an investor, sent me a short video clip. Shot from a distance inside the lounge of the suburban golf club. Have you heard? About Charlotte? My God, I used to golf with her father, and now she's CEO of Viridian Capital. And Robert? I hear he's been removed from the club's board. Ha! A man who built his life on borrowed prestige finally turned on by the very world he built. The laughter in the background made me both amused and chilled. Robert once told me, "In this world, people only remember who's on stage. The one behind the curtain will always be invisible." Now, I wasn't just on stage, I was directing the entire show. I didn't feel joy at their downfall. I didn't gloat. But I admit there was relief, as if the scales had finally been set right. That evening, I received a text From Emily, "Can we talk? Just 5 minutes. I need to apologize. Not to explain, just to apologize." I put the phone down, didn't answer right away. I no longer felt anger. I no longer needed revenge. But I wasn't sure I had anything left to hear. The next day, a cream envelope arrived at my office. No return address. Inside was an old photo, Emily and me, 15 and 17, sitting on the stone steps outside the mansion, laughing together. On the back, handwritten, "If I had listened back then, maybe things would have been different." I held the photo for a long time. Maybe things really would have been different. But one thing had not changed. I no longer lived to be someone else's backdrop. And now, when the world truly saw me, I knew I was no longer invisible. I didn't need anyone to bow their head in apology. I didn't need anyone to suffer as payback. Because what brought me here today was that I chose to walk forward instead of kneeling, waiting for forgiveness. As for them, Emily, Margaret, Robert, they finally understood that the price of arrogance isn't losing what they owned. It's losing the chance to walk alongside someone who once loved them, fiercely and wholeheartedly. That's the one thing they'll never get back. I didn't rush to answer when my mother called for the third time that morning. The screen flashed, "Mom, calling," once. That word stabbed me every time I saw it. Now, I felt only a quiet emptiness, no rage, no expectation. I let it ring until it stopped, then turned back to my desk. Autumn sunlight spilled across the wooden floor of my new apartment near Echo Lake, peaceful and uncluttered worlds away from the chaos of the house I once called home. Nearly 2 months had passed since I left. I thought they would stay silent forever. But no. That silence was finally broken by an email long, dripping with apologies, regrets, and pleas to reconnect as a real family. I read it 3 times, not because I didn't understand, but because I wasn't sure they understood what drove me away. In their letter, they spoke of missing dinners cooked by Charlotte, missing your laughter, feeling empty when Emily has no one to argue with. But not once did they mention treating me like a servant. Not once did they recall my mother publicly declaring I wasn't her daughter because I didn't dress like Emily. Not once did they acknowledge that I paid off Emily's student loans in secret, only to be called petty for refusing to buy her a new car. I drafted replies in my head dozens of times before typing the words. And when I pressed send, I knew I was ready not to return, but to draw the line clearly. I agreed to meet, but on 4 conditions: no more calling me the help, a public apology, mandatory family therapy, and an end to blind financial support for Emily. 3 days later, I walked into a small cafe on the corner where we had agreed to meet. My mother sat in the middle, still in her pearl-colored suit and matching pearl earrings she saved for significant occasions. Emily sat off to the side, eyes red. She avoided my gaze. Robert, my father, folded his hands on the table, eyes downcast. I sat, calm, unflinching. I was no longer the woman scrambling to please. I was the woman reclaiming her dignity. My mother spoke first, her voice trembling, though she clung to her old pride. "Charlotte, I've thought a lot, and I'm sorry for what I called you in front of everyone. I didn't realize how much I hurt you." I stayed silent. No nod, no rush to forgive. I needed her to continue. "I was wrong. You're not the help. You're my daughter. And I'm proud of what you've done. If you want, I'll say that in front of the whole family, whether at Thanksgiving or whenever you see fit." Robert lightly touched her shoulder, a quiet gesture of support. I turned to him. "And you, Dad?" He swallowed, then spoke slowly. "I stayed silent too long, Charlotte. out of cowardice, out of fear of conflict. But I saw it clear as day that I let you carry the family without recognition. I... I'm sorry, truly. I saw sincerity in his eyes. But then my gaze fell on Emily, still staring down. And you? I asked gently but firmly. What about the last condition? Emily looked up, her face blurred with tears. I don't even know where to start, she said hoarsely. I've been jealous of you, Charlotte, always, from childhood on. Mom always held you as the standard, but never let you see it. And I was spoiled, yet I never felt good enough. I always felt I had to prove myself, to keep Mom's attention, at any cost. She paused, then continued a real confession. I thought if you disappeared, I'd finally have Mom's full love. I was selfish. And I was wrong. I need help. I'll go to therapy. I don't want you to just be a stranger I used to call my sister. I hadn't expected those words from Emily. I thought she'd come with excuses, or worse, defiance. But I saw a real sister, stripped of arrogance. I nodded slowly, a lump rising in my throat. I don't need you to be perfect. I just need you to be honest. And this time, I'm not here to mend cracks with my own sacrifice. No one spoke. My mother reached to touch my hand, then pulled back, as if waiting for permission. I didn't flinch, but I didn't move closer either. Therapy starts next week, I said. With an outside specialist, not someone Mom arranges. Agreed, my mother answered instantly. Emily will cover her own rent starting next month. I won't be paying any more. Emily nodded. I'll find a job. For real. I know I've lived off you for far too long. I exhaled softly. Inside me there were still many fragments, but perhaps today was the first day those pieces were laid out on the table to be put back together, not by me alone, but by all of us. And this time, I would not let myself be erased from the picture of a happy family I once tried to repaint with my own tears. The gentle sound of piano music floated through the open space of the vast penthouse, where light from the floor to ceiling glass poured down onto honey gold oak floors. I stood by the balcony, a glass of champagne in my hand, offered by one of Lumina Strategy's staff. The air carried a faint scent of white orchids and lavender. In the distance, Denver's night sky glowed with city lights, the whole city breathing beneath my feet. I turned back inside. Every gaze was fixed on the main dining table, the full presence of those I had once, for so many years, called family. Margaret wore a deep violet Italian silk gown, high-necked, lightly padded shoulders, her face polished by a makeup artist I had hired. Richard sat to her right, his usual proud bearing now tinged with unease. And Daniel, my brother, polite in a tuxedo tailored by Lumina's staff 2 weeks earlier, tried to appear composed, though his eyes betrayed his restlessness. They were the honored guests for the first time in their lives, invited to an event they had not scripted, could not control, and had no permission to lecture or dominate. They no longer sat at the head of the table. I did. Richard Coleman, founder of Coleman Partners, Lumina's top strategic partner, stepped forward, raised his glass toward me, his eyes carrying more than respect. They carried recognition. Charlotte is the woman America now calls boss, he said, his deep voice carrying through the stillness. She hasn't only changed the way we think about investment strategy, she's changed the way we see a woman. From a place where no one acknowledged her, to a place where no one can ignore her. I rose, nodded lightly to Richard, then turned toward my family. Thank you, Richard, I began. My voice wasn't loud, but clear and steady like the marble floor beneath me. And thank you all for being here tonight. Someone once asked me, Charlotte, what does it feel like to succeed without your family by your side? That question haunted me for a long time, until recently. I took a few steps, my hand resting lightly on the back of an empty chair beside Margaret, the chair I had deliberately left vacant. This is the seat of the old Charlotte, the girl who stayed silent every time she was dismissed, who put aside her dreams at the raise of an eyebrow, who wondered if she was ever good enough or ever truly loved. I paused. My eyes met Margaret's. She stared back, unblinking, her lips pressed tight. "She doesn't sit here anymore," I said gently. She stood up, and she's standing here now. The air seemed to hold still for a long beat. Some might think I succeeded out of anger, out of a need for revenge. Not wrong, but not enough. I succeeded because I learned no one has the right to define your worth except yourself. I walked back to the head of the table, raised my glass. Success doesn't need permission. Your value does not depend on whether others recognize it. And respect it is never negotiable. The clinking of glasses rang across the room, but not everyone raised theirs. Margaret did not move. She sat upright, as if struggling with something inside. I didn't wait for a response. I turned away. I hadn't organized this dinner for comfort. I had organized it to mark the truth. After the main course, a short documentary video played on the hidden LED wall behind the bar. The first image, a small rented living room in Aurora where I drafted Lumina's very first business plan on an old laptop. Then photos of sticky notes plastered across walls, a whiteboard filled with messy handwriting about data analysis and portfolio management. Next came images of the first signing with Orion Capital, my first private office, barely 200 square feet, and scenes of me staying up all night with the founding team, now all executives, sitting scattered through the audience tonight. The video ended with "Today, this new penthouse, Lumina's 32nd floor headquarters with a titanium logo gleaming bright, and me in a white suit, standing among my staff, not as a symbol but as proof." Applause swelled like waves. I stepped back, letting everyone return to dinner, letting Richard speak with partners, letting Lumina's staff bring out dessert. Margaret rose. She walked toward me, each step slow but resolute. I turned. Her face no longer wore its familiar coldness. Instead, something closer to gratitude, tinged with confusion. "Charlotte," she said, so softly only I could hear. "I don't know how you did it, but you did." I smiled. Not the smile of triumph, but the smile of someone who no longer needed validation. "You don't need to know, Mom," I said, looking her straight in the eye. "You just need to. I was never meant to belong to the box you tried to keep me in, and I was never meant to be the version you wanted. I am myself, and I'm proud of that." Margaret said nothing. She gave the slightest nod, then turned away. At that moment, I understood sometimes forgiveness doesn't need an apology. And rising up isn't about proving yourself to them, but about reminding yourself that you are worthy. Under the shimmering lights of the penthouse, amid laughter, I stood there once more, not as Margaret's daughter, not as Daniel's sister, but as Charlotte Hayes, founder and CEO of Lumina Strategies. And I was free. I looked down at my hands, nails chipped, skin scratched from carrying hot dishes and cleaning grease all afternoon. The silverware still streaked with stains from fast food chicken that had been rushed in. Part of me wanted to cry. Part of me felt strangely relieved. Because when the chaos erupted, when the masks in that house began to crack, I saw the truth. I no longer wanted to live in silent sacrifice or hollow expectations. And what about you? If you were in that place, given impossible tasks, left unsupported, then turned into the excuse for others' blame and ridicule, how would you handle it? Would you keep swallowing it in silence, or would you rise to claim the respect you deserve? I believe every family carries its unspoken things, expectations, favoritism, disappointments, wounds layered over the years. But I also believe that somewhere each of us deserves to be heard, to be respected, and to live a life not to please others, but to honor our own worth. If my story brought back something from your own life, a dinner, a holiday, or a moment where you felt abandoned or dismissed, share it with me in the comments. Because I believe when we speak our truth, we not only heal ourselves, but open space for others to see themselves in it too. And if you care about true family stories, ones with tears, pain, but also awakening and courage, I invite you to follow this channel so you won't miss what's coming. Because inside every home, there are stories never told. And sometimes it's those very stories that remind us we are not alone. See you soon.